and where you are in this moment. Relax. Feel your body if you wish. Let your shoulders go limp. Let your eyes go soft. Be at peace with who you are. Good morning. My name is Byrd Tetzlaff, and I am using the pronouns she and her. A lot of us have people in our lives that voted differently than we did. That's not unusual, but somehow these days that seems to be more difficult than it used to be. Now, today I'm not addressing anything on the national level. I just want to talk about our personal lives, our friends, family, people we work with, people we don't necessarily want to cut out of our lives. But if politics comes up for many of us, it often turns out into a debate. Sometimes with raised voices. It's like we forget how important we are to each other. I keep on thinking there's got to be a better way. I grew up in a divided household. Papa was a John Birch Republican. Mother was a Roosevelt Democrat. They seldom talked politics in front of the children, but once in a while they did slip up. And Papa was always trying to get us to be on his side. One time my father was trying to convince me that communism was the absolute worst thing in the world. He went on and on about it. And he actually said these words to me. If your mommy is a commie, then you gotta turn her in. I was horrified that he could say that. I think it was that exact moment that I turned into a liberal. I remember another time both my parents were talking to each other and Papa was again holding forth about the communists. And he said something like, we have to stop them. Why, we have to go to Vietnam or else they will take over the world. And my mother came back with, now, Raymond, calm down. You know that's not what Jesus taught. Communists are God's children too. But then a half an hour later, they would be sitting down at lunch, calmly discussing about what to do about the old garage door. You don't see that often nowadays. It seems like now we stay mad at each other all the time. And sometimes it's not even debating, it's screaming. How do you deal with that? How do you keep connected when you're both so angry with each other? How do you find another way? Well, recently I was invited to a Zoom meeting about from the League of the Women Voters. And I saw a lot of fellow UUers there. The speaker was Megan Zwart of St. Mary's College. Turns out she teaches a course called Difficult Conversations. and her presentation was just what I needed to hear. Strangely enough, none of it is really new. Its skills we're all familiar with. Just sometimes it's useful to be reminded of what we already know, and sometimes it needs to be articulated. Back in 2017, she was teaching a basic course in philosophy when a number of her students came to her because they were wrestling with how to deal with friends or relatives who voted differently than they did. Both liberals and conservatives were wrestling with this issue. They wanted to find a way to get along while still holding true to what they believed. One of Zwart's colleagues noted, "There is a hunger among our students for meaning, connection, and community. And these things are more possible if there is an environment that values and supports good and open dialogue. The ability to listen with empathy and for understanding, along with the skill to speak and be heard, would be powerful tools for our students." So with the help of students and her fellow faculty, Zwart developed a course for dealing with difficult conversations. Interestingly enough, her classes were almost evenly split 50-50 with conservatives and liberals, and everyone was interested in learning how to negotiate those difficult conversations, because this is an issue both sides have to deal with. The whole idea has expanded to more than just one class. They currently have more advanced classes and seminars. I'd really like to experience some of that. I'm hoping that she will offer something up on Zoom, but so far, that is just my fantasy. Zwart is teaching students how to deal with all sorts of differences, both religious and political, which seem to be the two main areas of contention. I took notes during that talk, and I share my understandings here. To those of you who were also at that meeting, I apologize for repeating what you heard, but I think her ideas are important enough to share. Zwart begins with the premise that if what you want is to talk the other person around to your side, you are not having a dialogue. You're having a debate. Debate seldom persuades the other person of the rightness of your stance. In fact, debate usually hardens everyone's position and leaves us less open to seeing the other side. Zwart encourages dialogue. As she says, when debate is the goal, there's a winner and a loser. With dialogue, the emphasis is on the conversation and how freely the participants can share their opinions and listen to one another. The class, by the way, has been a raving success, with folks on both sides being much more open and connected. But before you even get to the stage of sitting down and beginning, Zwart thinks it's helpful to assess the situation. Physically, where are you at the moment? What's going on around you? For instance, you're not going to have a dialogue in an elevator. For best results, both people should be in a quiet place that's comfortable. You don't want to be interrupted, so not where your kids are running in and out. Both participants should be in a comfort zone. Zwart believes there are 6 key principles for a good dialogue. The first one is attention. You have to pay attention. Be present. Focus on what the other person is saying, not on what you're going to come back with. The whole point of listening is to understand where the other person is coming from, not to convince them that they are wrong. Don't assume you already know what they think or where they've been. People often may surprise you. And then listen to yourself and your reactions. Where are you coming from? Are you really listening to understand, or are you just waiting to pounce? She mentions that values usually become important in any discussion, and often they are unspoken. She wants us to ask, what values are being talked about? What values might you share? Personally, I recommend reality checking. Tell the other person that you think we might share a value, and state your understanding of what that value is. Be open to any correction or modification they might have. And if you do not, in fact, share that value, it's okay. You're there to understand, not convert. Personally, open listening isn't always easy for me. I always want to blurt out my truth because it's so obvious I'm right. It's been a rather painful lesson to stop myself from holding forth. It's important to really hear rather than to pick apart what the other person's saying, and frankly, I don't always succeed, but I am trying. The second principle is empathy. Listen well. Zwart asks us to see if we can understand where the other person is coming from and why. If you were in that situation, would you feel the same way or think the same thing? One thing that might be helpful in any discussion is to imagine, what if you had their experiences? Would you come to the same conclusion? What if you'd been born to different parents or in a different country with a different culture? Would you still think what you think now? It's important to see someone else's perspective, and not a bad idea to be aware of your own. For myself, if I shut up long enough to hear them, I'm usually pretty good at empathy. But it does take me shutting up, and that's not always easy. Part of me often wants to point out where they've gone wrong, and it's not useful, and it's not dialogue. The third principle is curiosity. Ask good questions, not trying to trap the other person, but to understand them. This is not the time for the Socratic method. It's a time of exploration. And this principle isn't bad. I really do enjoy finding out what other people believe and why they believe it. Most of the time, I can detach myself from their position and not take it personally, although I admit some things can hit pretty close to home. And then I have to watch myself because I can get defensive. And as we all know, defensiveness shuts everyone down. It's not helpful. It just makes everyone dig deeper into their positions. But curiosity can open things up and create a positive situation. One of the things that does make me defensive is when my values are questioned or dismissed. That one gets to me pretty quick. Zwart suggests that I turn that defensiveness into curiosity, which I find challenging, and I admit it is not my strong suit. The fourth principle is intellectual humility. It has to do with being honest with yourself about what do you know and not know about the subject. Whether you're talking politics or religion, sometimes people come up with some very strange things presented as reality. This area is one of my Achilles' heels right there. I'm always so sure I know what reality is. My sources are right. And frankly, there are certain sources on the other side that I automatically dismiss. But if my dialogue partner, uses these sources, then I need to be upfront about my distrust and why. And that implies that I have to be willing to hear their distrust of my sources. The problem is almost every source is biased, one way or the other. Even the ones that I agree with are slanted. How do you get around that? And just because a source is biased does not mean that they are lying or making things up. They may just see things from a different perspective. This is a very real conundrum for both sides, and I'd like to point out there's often more than just two sides to every issue. Zwart's fifth principle is intellectual responsibility. Take facts seriously. Zwart asks, how much high-quality information do you have on this issue? Is it cited in more than one reliable source that includes editors and fact-checking? For me, almost never. What are facts? They can be so tricky. I often do not have all the facts, but frankly, I usually don't think the other person does either. And usually it's not really facts that we're discussing, more viewpoints and priorities. One person I know says that in his discussions, no rhetoric is allowed. Well, what does that mean? What is rhetoric in this situation? Well, for instance, the other person can say that the moon is made of green cheese. That is not a fact. But if he says he believes the moon is made of green cheese, that may and well be a fact, because he may indeed believe that. So that means the subject under discussion is his belief, and maybe why he believes that. The last principle is courage. Speak up when something matters to you. And I agree it's very important to do that, but for me, this is often a hard one. I do think it's important not to shove my opinion on anyone else, but to get it out there. And it's kind of unfair if I don't allow the other person to understand where I'm coming from. But I find myself often strangely inarticulate to things that really matter to me. When it comes to politics, there are some issues that folks are just as strident about as they can be. Me too. But in a dialogue, I'm not there to convert. That is not my job. My job is to understand and to ask the same from them. And that means I need to be open about where I am coming from. I have been known to use the phrase, well, I see things a little differently. I'm hopeful that that does not trigger defensiveness. I know all of this can be rather difficult, but in listening and sharing, we are living our values. Actually, if we truly believe in the dignity and worth of every individual, we have to live that value by caring enough about them to try and understand. And by being open, we have to care about ourselves and our values enough to share with them. Speaking my truth can be scary. Putting to words in something that holds my deepest values, I share that with very few. But sometimes I think we need to try. That's the end of her principles. Like I said, I found all of this very helpful. It promotes understanding rather than name-calling. It allows for disagreement without anger. I think it's a lot healthier than what we seem to have now. And there's something very important about feeling that you have been heard. I put this service together because I really care about understanding and connections. And I suspect many of you are facing the same issue. Just because someone voted differently than we did, that doesn't mean they are a jerk. In fact, some of them are wonderful people that we care about. We need to remember that, because that caring, that connection matters. It doesn't mean we put aside our own thoughts and opinions. It just means we value the other person enough to hear where they are coming from. But I want to say one more thing. It's about stereotypes. American culture is very good at putting stereotypes on everything, and it's not helpful. We say all Republicans are fill in the blank. Doesn't matter what you fill in the blank with, good or bad. It's a lie. We say all Democrats are, and we fill in the blank again. It's still wrong. All MAGA are. No. The only thing we all are is afraid. Blessed be. We will now take the morning offertory.
Dona nobis pacem pacem Dona nobis pacem Dona Say